Hello and welcome to Bits and Pieces. I am your host Jasper. In this video, we're going to be talking about video cards or graphics cards. They are both, again, terms for the same thing. And you can use either term interchangeably with each other. They both mean the same thing. So they're not always essential to a build. You don't always need a graphics. Things to note, just an overview to start with. They're not always essential to a build, but they are nice to have if you can spare the money, which the money is going to be a lot because graphics cards typically cost a large portion of money. They are a dedicated processor for graphics, and it usually runs better than the graphics built onto your motherboard if it has them. And it is expensive to build with a graphics card, but it is worth it if you can spare the cash. So things you want to consider. You want to consider the brand of the graphics card, because it can affect performance in certain activities. Like, for example, if you're a gamer and you like to play video games, so there are certain games that have incompatibilities with certain graphics card drivers. Like, for example, the game Elden Ring. There is a known glitch with certain enemies in that game that causes the game to completely crash if you have an AMD graphics card. So just be sure and do some research on that to check, does this graphics card have certain issues with certain things that I'm going to be using? And just double check that, make sure that no issues are going to show up. You also want to look into the GPU itself and the VRAM, because video cards come with a GPU, which is like a CPU, but it's dedicated only to processing the graphics of a system. And it's built into the video card, and they have dedicated RAM along with them called VRAM or visual RAM. You need to consider the VRAM amount on the card you can buy, because higher VRAM lets you offload more data to the VRAM and have it not be on your computer system's RAM and just be pushed off to the dedicated thing that can be used to process all of it. Makes it so you can process other things faster while processing graphics, as it processes it separately on its own. You also want to consider compatibility. You want to make sure that it can work with the power supply you have, both in terms of wattage, because if it's too costly on the watts on your system, it will not run. The system will just refuse to turn on. And there's a port on each graphics card to provide additional power because it is extremely intensive. There's a lot of work going on in a graphics card, and it needs a bit of additional power from the power supply to run. And so you need to make sure that the cable that goes to the graphics card is present and able to be used, and has to have the right port with the PSU cable to fit. There's also some more compatibility things you need to look into, and that is the ports on the outside of the system, because certain video port cables may not be on the graphics card that are on your monitor, and you want to make sure that you can have the compatibility between those two. You also might want to look into the specs to see if it supports multiple connections, because say you want to do a dual or tri monitor setup, you need to make sure that your graphics card is able to support doing that before you can actually set that up. So that is a good idea to look into that as well if that's something you are considering doing. Lastly, to conclude, you're going to make sure to check that the card is compatible with the system before you buy it. Typically, better specs for your card, the more expensive it will be. In the process of doing research for this video, I went on a popular part site called Newegg and looked into some graphics cards just to check the specs to see and double check what I needed to cover, and found a graphics card that is about $1,000. They can be very, very expensive. It likely has very high specs, which is why the price tag is so high. But you need to consider that alongside all the specs that you're getting to balance out to make sure that it's worth the money that you're spending.